the sun is shining, don't you know it's raining in my heart? I feel the walls closing in at just the thought of you leaving. It's gone too far. Now I find myself on the outside, just looking in. Before you leave me alone tonight, baby, baby, read me my rights. I'm just a prisoner, caught up in a world I can't control. Hey, what am I doing here? Just drowning in these tears. How can you walk away and watch it all just crumble after all these years? Before you do me wrong tonight, baby, baby, read me my rights. Don't I have the right to want you? Don't I have the right to love you? Do I have to let you go? Oh, tell me why you wanna leave me, darling, if you need me. Don't I have the right to know? Do you still love me? Or am I just wasting my time, just losing my mind? Before you break my heart tonight, baby, baby, read me my rights. Just wasting my time, just losing my mind. Before you do me wrong tonight, baby, baby, read me my rights. Before you break my heart tonight, baby, baby, read me my rights.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning to my listeners and watchers and viewers. It is Sunday. You are joining us now at www.villageconnectionnetwork.com and villageconnectionradio.com. And we're here at the Justice Hour. I'm Pamela Roth, and I want to welcome everybody this morning. And welcome my guest. He's not only a friend of mine, he's a friend of the Justice Hour because John has been here before. And he was so enthralling and thrilling that I brought him back. So good morning, John
Thank you.
A.
Thank you.
Curley.
I don't often get return requests, so I'm very flattered. Thank you. Most people are happy once I'm gone.
Well, you know something, we're gluttons for punishment, so we brought you back. Good morning, Big Jim.
What's up there, Pamela?
I don't understand why. I just put this on live and it's not showing, so I don't know what I just did. So I'm going to
That's
fix
because I
this.
cut you off.
Oh, you cut me off. Oh,
No,
that's
how
not-
could I do that?
I'm going to fix that in a second. Okay. So everybody, John Curley is here, and John is a private investigator.
Yes.
And this is your first, it's your second book?
It's my first published novel.
Okay. First published novel. I'm going to hold it up for everybody. It's called Bonds, Bonds, by John A. Curley. And I'm going to be talking to you about this book.
Okay.
Well, first of all, before we even get there, tell us a little bit about you, because a lot of people may not remember you coming on once
Sure.
before. And that was actually at our other studio.
Well, how far back and how in depth do you want me to go?
No, I'm just kidding. We only have an hour. So
Okay.
condense your years of experience.
I'm a licensed
Into
private investigator.
an hour.
Since I've been a private investigator since March 13th, Friday the 13th, 1987.
Right. I'm just going to fix this a second.
I'm a licensed investigator. I have a consulting company, and I write and I advocate for better child protection.
And you've been doing that for how long?
Which part? The writing or the advocation?
The writing, the
Writing,
child advocacy.
actually started writing as far back as the late 80s, and at the suggestion of a friend.
I'm doing it.
Should I talk about it? Or?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
So as long as you're not divulging anything.
Well, I had a good friend of mine. His name is Bruce Walsh, and sadly, he was a very good friend. He was like my brother, and he passed away not that long ago, earlier this year. And Bruce and I would go out and we would speak often and have lunch and talk and have drinks. And he had been an English teacher prior to being an attorney. And one day I was telling him about a job that I had done where I got out after somebody took a few shots at me, and I managed to get out with my skin intact. And he said to me while we were sitting there, he said, "You should write." And I said, he goes, there was and he was mistaken about this. He said, when I used to teach, there was an essay that I had my students read. He said, I believe it was by Dashiell Hammett, and it was about the hero in the crime novels. And he said, not only do you remind me of the guy that he writes about,
the
but
character in his books.
yes, or the just in general, the archetype, I guess he was discussing. He said, because you have this sort of outdated, which is unfortunate, sense of honor that a lot of people don't have these days. And he said, you talk a certain way, and just the way you make me experience what you experienced today. He said, you should write. And I played around with it for a while, and finally I wrote a horror novel or manuscript. And I had a cousin who was in publishing, and at a family picnic she had said, look, I do publishing, let me read it. So I hastily gave her the the original and the copy, and then we're talking, it was word processors and typewriters then, and I gave her the only two in existence, and she called me from Cape Fear about a week later, and she said, I gotta tell you, this is really good. She said, you have to do a rewrite on the first 60 pages or so. I thought it was 90. I actually was a little, I reread it, and I thought, that's gotta change,
Right.
She said, but there's no way we wouldn't publish this. And I said, well, that's great. And then a couple of weeks go by, and I haven't heard from her. So I call her house. I'm not getting an answer. I called my cousin Bobby, I think, and I said, have you heard from Meg? He said, no. I said, look, you know what? I haven't heard from her. And he started calling around for me, and he called me back, and he said, she had a stroke.
Oh,
And I thank God she was okay, but she was in the hospital long past the time that her rental house in Cape Fear was there. And when she went back to get her belongings,
everything was gone.
yes, so that
Including your manuscripts.
yes, and
Wow.
that kind of took the wind out of my sails. It was a couple of hours a day for 8 months, and I just put it away. And then I began corresponding on the internet with Andrew Vax 3 or 4 years ago on Facebook, the holy Facebook. And
Well, you know something. If anybody doesn't know who Andrew Vax is, incredible author. This man is
Yes.
just so amazing. I remember the first time I ever picked up one of his books was when I was in law school, and I remember one of the things about Andrew. He's an attorney and he's a published author, but what's really amazing is that he is very much a child's rights advocate.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what I always remembered about, I'm trying to remember one of the first books that I wrote, that I read from him, but what was really interesting is the way he writes. And he said that basically, that when everybody, the average person goes to sleep at night, like whatever, 10 o'clock at night, we call it a night, and because we all have to get up for our day jobs, he said there's like this whole underbelly in New York. He writes about New York, a whole underbelly of the seedy, dirty, gritty life that basically awakens at night, and it's just horrible of what happens with runaway children.
Yes. Yeah.
And he writes both as an attorney from what he's seen, and I guess if he wrote it not as a fiction book,
Right.
if he was to write it straight out, it would just be too powerful, and people would be turned off, going like, "Wow, this is just it's too riveting, and it's too real. I can't read it." But because he writes it in such a way that you're reading like a crime novel through the investigator and through the characters, it makes you really go through every one of his books, and it's so powerful.
Yeah.
And I know he's a huge mentor to you.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be doing the child advocacy or the writing, I believe, if it wasn't for Andrew.
Right.
It's interesting that you would say that, because he wrote a book about child abuse, investigating it, the causes and things like that, and he sold 1,000 copies or so. He writes a book on crime. He writes crime fiction, but he keeps what happens to the children real, and gets the message out that way, and sells 100 times more than what he would sell with the textbook. So
Right.
that's his way of getting the message
Right,
out.
because something, you just read it as a textbook and it's just too dry. But not only that, it's just too horrifying to think of what actually goes on. And
He was often accused of making it up. It was dark. He wrote, his first novel, I believe, was A Bomb Built in Hell, or that's what it came to be, about someone who had been horrifically abused walking into a school with guns and nerve gas. And that was in the 70s that he wrote that, years before Columbine. And the point that he was making is, when you deprive a child of the unconditional love that the child is entitled to, and you replace that with abuse, and it's not corrected, either in a state-raised home or the child's bio family's home,
Right.
you're going to get monsters that are made. And people would say, "Oh, that's never going to happen. It's dark fiction," and now it happens all too frequently.
Well, something, it was happening, but it wasn't brought to light.
Yeah. Well, the mass shootings, the mass school shootings, I believe the first one was Columbine.
Right, because I remember I was living in Colorado at the time.
Yeah, and this is
Columbine.
about 10 or 15 years earlier than that, and people just dismissed it and said it can't happen.
Well, child abuse obviously has been going on for hundreds of years, because if you recall, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of history, is the fact that back in the day, I would say 1700s, 1800s, when people would have a child, and if there was anything wrong with the child, say for instance, whether they were physically handicapped or possibly mentally handicapped, back in the day, it was an embarrassment. You didn't want to have that child in your family because you didn't know how to deal with it. And society didn't know how to deal with it. So they locked these children up in these state-run orphanages. They were almost like prison camps, prison hospitals for these kids. And so that's something that happened, like I said, back early 1900s. And whatever the disease was that the child had, even if it was something so minor, it wasn't paid attention to, and the families didn't want to deal with it. So it was just lock the kid away. It's almost like The Secret. Everyone had a secret child somewhere, and
Sure.
you just locked them up.
And there was also physical abuse was the norm.
It was physical abuse and mental
sexual
abuse.
abuse as
Right.
well, which nobody ever talked about.
Right, but that also happened in those orphanages.
Sure. It happened. Predators hunt where there's prey. And predators have been growing their own victims since there's been predators. So, and until, if the way the law approached it, you can go back about 100 years ago, and in the Bronx Zoo there was an actual pygmy on exhibit. and that's not that long ago. Gives you an idea as to how antiquated some of the laws are. The incest loophole, which was in New York, which essentially, if you molested your own child, it was a charge akin to adultery, was closed back in the early 2000s. Andrew was one of the people that got that movement going. A matter of fact, Sheldon Silver, we all know who that is, opposed closing the incest loophole. And you really have to ask yourself why any. Well, and the answer is because royalty has always done what it sees fit. And so the whole issue there, and not only that, it's the society is so politically charged now. The majority of the people on the left, their political talking point is, take the kids away and let the state raise them. Well, abuse happens in the state just as the same. And the right is like the destruction of the great American family, like every family was Ozzie and Harriet. Ask people. I mean, I remember physical punishment. I'm talking getting beat not by my parents, thank God, but kids would get hit with a switch. Right? You'd bleed, and that more often than not, that's what it was. So there's been progress made, but not nearly enough. We have to do a lot more than that.
Well, I know we're jumping all around, but I remember a while ago, maybe about last year, you had contacted me because there's an organization you're trying to get funding where you are in Staten Island with regards to changing the laws for children who are abused. How is that going?
Well, the government is exceptionally and unbelievably slow when it comes to making improvements for certain types of corporations. We have an attorney that's working with us, Brian Solomon, is...
I know Brian.
Oh, yes, you know Brian. Brian is we're setting up the paperwork and waiting for stuff to come back. Where we're going to be a not-for-profit lobbying agency. Lobbying is the key thing, and there is another organization in the Southern in the Southern Law Center, not the Southern Poverty Law Center. That's something completely different.
Right.
It's called the Legislative Drafting Institute for Child Protection, and Andrew's one of the founders, and they are a group of experts in child care who will actually draft legislation for politicians so that we don't have laws that are jokes, like Megan's Law, for example.
Well, let me ask you something. Why do you think that the government is so slow to enact laws that are for the protection of children?
Because it is on no politician's platform. We had a presidential election 2 years ago. Neither candidate talked about it. We had a mayoral election in New York last year. None of the candidates talked about it. ACS could be vastly improved, and nobody talks about it. That's the purpose of the lobbying group that we're trying to form, is we're going to let politicians know we vote, and we want you to make this an issue. And we want things that are going to make a difference. And I'll say it again, Megan's Law. Everybody thinks that Megan's Law is this great thing. Okay, what it is...
Well, what I'd like you to do is, can you explain to our viewers and listeners what Megan's Law is?
Yes.
Because we have people watching from other states and
Sure.
other countries.
Well, it's most states have something like that. What it does is it creates a sex offender registry, okay, and it tells you where these people are supposed to be living. So
they're not supposed to be living within a certain number of feet of schools.
That varies from place to place, not in New York, as far as I know. And if it is, it's not being adhered to. Megan's Law is almost useless. There is absolutely no money that goes into verifying where most of these people are. So what they're saying is, we are going to take this thing that enjoys abusing children, and that's exactly why they do it. They are gratified by doing so. Right. We're going to put it in jail, but not for as long as we should, and it's going to get out. And rather than try to keep it in jail, we're going to let it. We're going to tell you where it is, but we're not going to put any real money into making sure it's where it says it's living.
Right. All they're doing, basically, because I know I've had clients with sex offenders who are clients who they have to do the registry.
Yes.
And of course, it depends on the level. You could be low level or high level, high risk. But all they're doing is providing an address. Like you're saying, nobody is then going out to find
No.
out, is this person still living there? So they provide an address. So this way they're released and they go to the program and they say, okay, I'm going to be living at, 2020 Mockingbird Lane. But is anybody actually going to be following up a month, 6 months, or a year later on and finding out, does that person still live there? Are there children in the house?
Yes, and this is the problem. And then you will have people that will advocate for incredibly foolish things. This is because they don't understand what they're doing. People they want sex offenders to be locked up as being mentally ill. They're not mentally ill. They don't do it because they're sick. They do it because they enjoy it. There are plenty of people, children of the secret, that are molested when they're children, who grow up and they have disturbing feelings of sexuality towards children, and they seek help for that. That's a pedophile. A predatory pedophile enjoys what they're doing. They know it's going to destroy the child, and they just don't care.
Because it's
And
their
you're-
own gratification. They're
Right.
not interested.
Exactly.
The child is just the thing for the moment.
And we both do criminal law.
Right.
You're an attorney, and I've done criminal defense investigations. It's a defense attorney's dream for the state to designate their client as sick, and it's just not the case. There could be so many laws enacted that could actually help. Instead, we get garbage. There was this big Child Victims Act that everybody was screaming about. We have to save the children. We have to save the children. The statute in New York runs when the victim turns 23. Okay, that's absurd. Okay, but you have people that that obviously, at least as far as I'm concerned, didn't know what they're doing, and the whole issue becomes about the statute. Okay, they wanted to get rid of the statute of limitations, which I think is insane. There's no statute of limitations on murder. But most people will say, well, that's because of the seriousness of the crime. Well, no, it's because the primary evidence was never going to be the victim's testimony. Okay? I don't want to have a 90-year-old in a nursing home being sued by somebody that's 70 for something that might have happened 75 years ago when it's a he said, she said situation. I don't want that. The system is overburdened as it is. So no statute's absurd. All right? And it doesn't mean that you don't care about victims. Of course you care about victims. Right. But there has to be due process, and there has to be a statute of limitations. There were other things, but all they did was focus on that, and pardon my language, it becomes then a pissing match between the trial lawyers who are contributing money to politicians pushing for it, and the Catholic Church, which is going to get destroyed with lawsuits, pushing money to stop it, and there's no real change that's made. Okay, and you have the reason that is because there's no expertise involved.
Just to cut you off just for 1 second, when you're talking about, saying it's mental illness, I don't agree with that. Okay, just so you know, because that to me is just a blanket cover on everything. When you're not sure of something, and again, I am a defense attorney. I was a prosecutor for 2 years in the Kings County DA's office, and I've been a criminal defense attorney now going on approximately 21 years. I don't agree with that, though. I don't agree on saying no matter what it is, that it's like a catch-all phrase. Oh, it's mental illness. He or she didn't take their meds.
No, but it's promulgating a lie, and it's doing a disservice to the people of this state.
It's also doing a disservice to not only the predator, because he or she is not getting the right treatment. Again, it's not necessarily mental illness, but also nothing's being done about the victim, because that victim is destroyed.
That's correct.
Okay, so the victim has to not only live with everything that happened to him or her from a young age, but it's also going to impact his or her relationship, and possibly his or her relationship if they do have children.
Yeah.
Because it makes you wonder, now, does the victim then in turn become a predator?
That does happen. There are no. First of all, and this has been going on constantly for the past couple of weeks with the Kavanaugh hearings as a basis for some of it. There are no accurate statistics as far as the number of children that are abused or the people that are falsely accused. The nature of the subject, by its nature, makes it incredibly difficult, because a lot of people won't come forward, a lot of people will lie. We know that all these things happen enough to put a stop to it, and to me that's a waste of time. Okay, if there was just 10 kids getting abused, that's too many. Okay, if there's one person falsely accused, that's too many. people, one in this number comes up, 1 out of 5 kids is going to be abused in New York. It could be more than that, it could be less than that. But
who's doing the research
well,
on that?
when you get to when you ask them and they go, huh? And when you actually see the studies that are done and you look at them, it becomes obvious after a certain time that it's not accurate. That's a waste of time. We know that it happens. We also know that a portion of the people that are abused are they themselves going to turn into people that abuse children. I often use the analogy when I'm speaking to people. I'll ask the group, how many people watch The Walking Dead? And half the people raise their hand. I'll say, all right, so picture this for a second. We have this kind of creature, right? It looks like us, but it's not. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it preys on our kids, okay? And I don't know, to say 1 out of 10 of the kids that it preys on, it's going to turn into a creature. Like it's a vampire, but it doesn't turn all of them, okay? Now, if that was an accurate thing, we would be up in arms. We'd be screaming for something to be done. We'd need every politician, like they do on the nonsensical war on drugs, would be down from politicians would be down from Albany for their photo ops, and they'd take their pictures and they'd put the restrictions in on the pain pills. Then everybody would switch back to heroin, which is what happened. And then all the kids are going to keep dying, and the politicians got their picture in, and the sheep that vote for them are going, yeah, and that's it. And
but still nothing changes.
Right.
And now it's just another talking head for another 2-year term or another 4-year term.
And then I make the point, it's not a story. That's what's happening. That's what's happening to us right now. And people don't understand that. And until we make children our issue, until we say to them, you're going to lose your cushy job in the next 4 years if you don't do something. And there'll be attempts. Dan Donovan is the congressman, and I hope he or somebody else happens to hear this. The entire time, as far as I could see, he's the congressman. He doesn't do anything about this.
And we're talking about Dan Donovan out in Staten Island.
Yes. I thought I've known Dan. I've interacted with him. I thought he was a pretty fair guy. And then I believe it was last June, because it became apparent that Michael Grimm, the congressman who was arrested for, I believe, tax evasion, was going to run in a primary against him. Mm-hmm. Then suddenly he gives a press conference, and there's this outrage because pedophiles are using sex dolls that look like children. And what he does is he gets a group of people standing behind him, and they get this solemn look, and he says, "This is an outrage. This is disgusting. Something's got to be done." And all the people that sat there and clapped and said, "Yeah, you're right," they're all just being duped into politics, because
into agreeing with him.
Very simply said, you have tens of thousands of children real time being trafficked, sexually abused, physically abused,
kidnapped,
neglected,
right,
or so emotionally crippled by abuse that they grow up and they can't function as adults, and some of them are killed. And while this is going on, you want to take away the dollies? That's what your point is? That's garbage. That's what politicians do. Okay? Max Rose is the guy running against him. The guy that would get my vote would be the guy that says, hey, you know what? I'm going to bring a law up in Congress that says, until France or any other country that gives asylum to sexual predators gives us custody of Roman Polanski, no more foreign aid. That's the guy I would vote for.
Right.
But
you know what's very disturbing? Everybody has children. How do you not place an importance on children? This is the future. These are not only your future voters. Yep. You have children in your house.
There's several reasons why.
You have children in school. It's just so pathetic.
There are several reasons why.
Well, I know there's got to be some money backing behind it, because
it's not just that. It's lack of focus. Like I said, the Child Victims Act. There were so many things. Like a quick example, there was a predator upstate who did 2 to 4 years for sexually molesting and then filming a 12-year-old girl. Okay? He got 2 to 4 for that, which is garbage. Somebody sent me some video of him. He's advertising, he's teaching martial arts out of his basement to kids. And there's a video of him with this little girl, he calls her MMA girl, and they're wrestling around. And when you know what the guy did, it just turns your stomach. And the guy says, what can we do about this? And I said, there's nothing you can do about it. He can absolutely do that. I mean, wouldn't it make sense that while you're screaming save the children with this Child Victims Act nonsense, that part of that was, if you did this and you were convicted of this, you can never work with children again? Doesn't that make sense? But they don't think about things like that because they're amateurs and they get into pissing matches with rival political factions. What it ended up, by the way, on that particular case was he was using a fake name on the internet with the video. That is against the law currently, and I believe he did an additional 8 months for that. But these are things, they're common sense. There's lack of focus. I mean, if you look at the NRA, love them or hate them, they are undeniably effective because they're a group of people together that so strongly believe in this issue that they're going to back it. Okay.
Why don't we have something like
because
that?
Too many people,
children.
It happens too frequently. People don't learn enough about it. Look, I have this conversation. Listen, people have told me, I'm a firm believer in due process. Innocent until proven guilty. It's not just for the courtroom. That is a principle that is in the Constitution, which is to me a sacred document. And that should be applied wherever possible, because making a false accusation is as simple as pointing and saying she's a witch and then she's drowned. That's how humans are. And anyone that says different has no idea. They're looking at it through a political lens at that point. Right. Okay, so I do believe in that. But people have said to me, oh, you don't believe victims. Of course I do. Okay, but the therapy, the healing aspect of dealing with people that are victims, you should absolutely believe. But independent law enforcement has to look at each individual case separate from any preconceived notions to get to the truth. People should be screened before they do this job. You will find people that are in jobs like ACS that think all children lie. You'll find people that think all children are abused. And you need to, in order to get to the truth as an investigator, you need to have no preconceived notion as to what happened, and you need to look at it. And yes, sometimes people are going to get away with things. This is how it works. Until somebody comes up with something better, that's it.
Right, but ACS right now is just such an overburdened agency.
It is.
For so many.
And Bill de Blasio, how the man sleeps at night. He puts a lot of effort into the pre-K thing,
right,
which gets him a lot of votes.
Right, universal pre-K.
Gets him a lot of votes, okay? But ACS workers are people who want to help. They want to help kids, so they're starting off right. They're thrust into a job. They're not taught how to accurately investigate what goes on. They're taught to conduct investigations off of clipboards. Ask people who ACS have visited. They do very surface work. That's what they're trained to do. They are overburdened with work. They're given too much work. And we pay people, and this is not a dig on the garbage men, but we pay people that pick up our trash less than we pay them. So
so you're putting more value on trash as an example than you are on children.
For the record, if the garbage collection stopped, the city would collapse in about 2 weeks.
No, I remember the garbage trucks.
But they have to be important enough to us. The children have to be important enough to us to mean it. And I've had people.
You know what it is, John? They're not paying these workers enough. They're also not training them. Okay, look back on how many years ago you had cases, and when do we hear anything about ACS and why it should be overhauled and why it should be dismantled and renewed? Only when there's another child, another dead baby, another dead child.
Think about Lisa Steinberg.
That's the one I was going to talk about.
Lisa Steinberg in the 80s, I remember reading that, this poor, beautiful little girl's beaten to death by the thing that illegally adopted her. Right. And it's in the papers
and
constantly.
the so-called woman who was in the house,
right.
She saw it as well.
And the papers constantly had stuff on that for the next 6 months. Everybody was screaming there's going to be change. The Bureau of Child Welfare was turned into ACS, and that was the big change. Okay, it's not important enough yet. And when people do get together, they're not being guided properly. You know, when Andrew started the movement to get the incest loophole closed, he did it the right way. These people, they run around with chickens with their head cut off. And also, you have to understand something. I'm not being cruel when I say this. If you were a victim of sexual abuse, and there are so many of them that I know and interact with and they actually attribute a status to me that I don't deserve very often. But I want to change things. And
we confide in you.
Yeah, sometimes, yes. And it's hard. There are many great people I know who have such tales of horrible abuse. However, you have to understand, you're not an expert in the subject because you were abused. If a guy beats you up, you're not an expert in assault. Right. You're an expert in your pain. You have to learn about these things. That's not saying, it's not a dig against the transcenders. It's fact. If you knew the whole story just by being a victim, everyone that had a heart attack would be a doctor. They'd be a cardiologist. It doesn't work that way. So you have to learn.
Right, but
and then ego gets involved.
Right, but also victims of either sexual assault or victims of child abuse, everybody copes with it differently.
Yes.
Okay, there are some victims who internalize it and just decide, something I'm going to cope by shutting it down or compartmentalizing it with it happened to me a long time ago, or it happened to a different part of me. I'm not that person anymore, and you disassociate yourself from it.
Right.
And if that's a coping mechanism that helps you, basically protects you to move on, that's what some people do. Not everybody can sit down and go for counseling or therapy for a lot of reasons. It's too painful, not only to have to relive what it is that you as a victim went through, but now you have to sit in a room and listen to everybody else. So now when you go home and you're thinking about what happened to you, now there's like the filter of other people's stories and horrendous situations that occurred. So now you're internalizing and living those people's nightmares.
Right.
So a lot of times too, for reasons like that, it's hard to sit in a room. It's also hard to sometimes to sit in a room and open up to other people, because you just don't want to be judged, and
Sure.
and it's almost like giving a piece of you away. So you're holding on to it, and you're holding on to the memories and everything else to help you become stronger.
Even worse than that, you'll see accounts of where prosecutors have taken victims, and the victim just can't go through with the testifying, and the prosecutor puts them in jail.
Yeah, I've
Look,
seen that too.
it is once there is so many things that are thrust upon victims after they've been victimized. The bullshit mantra that you heard from Oprah, you have to forgive to feel better. That's garbage. You don't have to forgive.
Well,
You forgive
since
me
it's
stepping
my show,
on your
I'll say
foot.
this: it's bullshit.
It is.
Okay, I'm sorry.
My friend Andrew has created a career of doing nothing but helping children, and the main fuel for that car is hate. I mean, if you ever speak to him, he would tell you, and I feel the same way. I mean, people have said to me, well, I've actually been told, because I believe in due process, I don't care about victims. My first response to that is, you have no idea what you're talking about. I helped to put my own flesh and blood in jail when that person was being abusive. So don't tell me that I don't care about victims, number one.
Right. And secondly, I could never personally forgive somebody who overpowers me, attacks me, and assaults me.
Well, yes.
I could never forgive them for what? So they can.
But
they're obviously going to continue doing it,
well,
or knowing that they
consider
got
this
away
too,
with
though.
it.
Here's a general fact about that the so-called do-gooders that are screaming in these people's faces, you got to forgive. If you are the abused person, it is your right to do as you want, okay? And people are thrusting this into them, forcing them to do this.
Which is why it makes it
emulating the
hard.
abuse that was done to them in the first place.
Exactly.
Something being done against their will. If you want to hate that person, then that's fine. Look, if it was legally permissible, I would stand at the edge of a cliff, and once they're convicted, I would throw them off until one of them was bad enough to take me with them, and then I have friends that would take my place. But that's not going to happen. Right. Okay, so what we need to do is to change these things. We have to there have to be procedures put in place. You have to understand sometimes there is something that can be fixed with the families, and the families can be reunited. And sometimes there's not. They should have the chance to reunite, but it shouldn't be indefinite. Kids are kids for a short period of time. If the kid is 10 and gets put back with the parents 2 years later and taken away and put back, and it's just, they're not going to get to be kids.
It stays with them forever.
Yes.
That's what people don't realize. It's like, oh, it happened to the person a long time ago. It happened to you when you were a kid. Get over it, move on. It's not that easy.
No, it's not.
Okay, because when you're alone in a room and it's quiet and there's nothing going on, you have that endless reel looping over and over and over again in your mind of every single thing that happened, and
yes.
The voices come back, and the screams or the pain that comes back, and nobody can understand that unless you're a victim.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And what we need to do to make things better is to have better trained investigators, number one. You need to have prosecutors that actually, first of all, we need the laws to be stronger. We need them to be put away. They need to be kept away from children, okay? Prosecutors will plead these things out left and right, and they'll tell you, well, we don't want to traumatize the child any further. But that's garbage.
But there's also more training. Prosecutors should be trained.
Prosecutors should be trained, but you have to remember, prosecutors run on election, okay? They run on their conviction rate. Okay? Typical case that I bring up, open up the Staten Island Advance one day, 21-year-old guy has been molesting his 11-year-old niece for years.
Right.
Okay? He got sentenced to 18 months. He was out in 12.
That's nothing.
She has a life sentence. She wakes up thinking about him. She thinks about him all day. And at night, when she can maybe fall asleep, she'll have nightmares about him. Okay? We need that to change. And what I've been told by people like Andrew and others who have represented children, there is that most of the time, you take that kid that's been abused, and he knows he or she knows that it was wrong to have that done to them.
Right.
You put them in court. Sometimes they give them a dog. but
they give them
they're in a
dog
safe
therapy.
environment.
Right.
They have people protecting them, and they can look at the thing that did it to them and said, he did that, she did that to me. It is an empowering experience for them. All right. Now, what I would like to see,
facing your accuser and
right,
just getting it out and being able to say, you did this to me.
I would like to see the focus of the legal system be turned toward crimes against children and less towards drugs, which people are going to use, and we've made no progress in that at all. There's things that can be done like that. And the way that there is change is when we get together as a group and say, you know what, I want to know what you're going to do for kids to the politicians. And not some nonsense. There's some assemblywoman that was running for mayor and then...
Molly Takis?
Yeah. When I asked her a question in an open forum what she was going to do about child abuse, she gave me a very good answer. She said, I don't really know that much about it. And but she was willing to find out. It didn't come up during the mayoral elections. And when she's running for assemblywoman again, she brings out a bill where if you have sex with a child prostitute, and that's a wrong term, by the way, you're guilty of an E felony, a lousy E felony,
which gets pled down to an A misdemeanor,
and could be probation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's garbage.
So again, it's another slap on the wrist, and again, it's not protecting the child.
Exactly, that's the contribution that you're making. We need people that know what they're doing to be behind these movements. We need people to band together, and we need people to work together. The idea is we want to keep our children safe, and until we make that something as important as the guns are to the NRA.
Or the opioid crisis, which we've been talking about for years, and that
the
doesn't
opioid
change.
Crisis.
Everybody talks about the opioid crisis. From President Trump down to Governor Christie, everybody talks about it. Okay, you know something? It's a problem. But as far as I'm concerned, that's voluntary. Nobody's forcing you to take drugs.
Yes, and there are people that suffer from addiction, and they should be helped. I agree with that.
Yes, okay, but it's not every single person. Whereas if you look at the statistics of what's been happening with children, it's been increasing. You have children who are being kidnapped and murdered after being sexually abused. You have little babies and infants being raped and murdered because obviously they're so ripped apart internally. Something. It's like, God forbid for saying this, the child's better off, the baby's better off not to survive something like that.
I've actually heard Andrew talk about instances where there have been children that were killed in households, and he has said that the dead child is the lucky child.
Right.
Look
at you have many times you have homes where it's a single parent home, and there are 4 and 5 children in there from different parents or different fathers, if you even know who the father is, and every one of them is abused. Or you have some parents have a handicapped child who they're holding hostage down in the basement, and they're starving the child to death, malnutrition, and meanwhile they're still collecting the checks, and they're abusing their own flesh and blood.
There needs to be caring and system-wide change. It beyond the politicians. It's us educating ourselves and making them do something, and then we can have change.
Well, this is what I'd like you to tell us, me, as well as our listeners. What is it that we can do before we have to leave for today? What is it that we can do to help you to get this bill or this agenda and everything else out there?
Perfect question.
Okay, because I know you a long time, and you know how I'm very much of an advocate with this for you, and I want to help, and I want to get this taken care of. But what can we do? Because now that you have everybody out there listening and watching, and it's just so tiresome to constantly watch the news again and again.
Then I can give you a formula for making things better right now. First of all, stop with the Facebook rants, okay? When it comes up on Facebook that the guy raped his kid, and I've done this myself, don't type out what you would do to the guy. We'd all like to get a hold of the guy and do that. What you're doing is you're making yourself feel better. You forget about the issue and you move on. Give me 10 minutes a week. Okay? The next time you read something like that in the paper, you send a letter to the prosecutor. You want the max. I vote. You want the max. And if enough of us did that, there would be change. Learn about it. Best place I would say is go to Andrew's website, VACSS.com. There are plenty of articles and material where you could educate yourself about what this is and how we can stop it. And vote. Let the people know. I'm a registered conservative. I'm a fiscal conservative. I don't care what people do socially. I don't care if my neighbor were two lesbians that had an AK-47 to guard their marijuana crop. It's not my business. I just hope they bring me cookies every once in a while. I'm fiscally conservative. I don't like to see money wasted. I would put money towards this, and I would vote for a Democrat or a liberal or a libertarian that was going to actually make kids their priority. It doesn't have to be the whole campaign, but get it on the campaign. And then make sure you have the right people advising you so you don't come up with nonsense like the Child Victims Act or a lousy felony for having sex with a prostituted child.
Well, how can they get in touch with you to find out more? Do you have a website?
I have a website, jcurleyandAssociates.com. JohnACurley.com will be up and running soon, my author website. I'm on Facebook. I answer people's questions, whether or not they're stupid, on Quora. You find me on Twitter. I'm not that hard to find. And if you are someone that is willing to work with us to stop this, to make it happen less, we'll talk, and you're in the fight with us. And if I could say one more thing,
go right ahead.
There's a magazine
because it's his book.
There's a magazine, ACES, ACES, Arts and Something Entertainment. I'm sorry, Amy, I'm not remembering it, but they feature my short stories as a literary supplement, and the short stories are about child protection and child abuse. And ACES is published every month, and I'm the literary section. I'm also supposedly. I'm in talks with Scotch, the editor of Switchblade magazine. It's a hard-boiled noir magazine. A really, really nice guy, and it's a good magazine whether they put me in it or not. It's good to pick up and read for the genre. Crime fiction is the genre which gives you the pulse of a population, and it's an important thing to read.
Well, thank you. And again, this is a very interesting and very serious topic having to do with children and child's rights. Speak to your elected officials and let them know that this is something that concerns you and it should concern them. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you so much to my guest, John Curley. Go out, get the book. It's called Bonds by John Curley. Have a wonderful Sunday, and we will see you here next Sunday. Have a great day, everybody.
The sun is shining. Don't you know it's raining in my heart? I feel the walls closing in at just the thought of you leaving. It's gone too far. Now I find myself on the outside, just looking in. Before you leave me alone tonight, baby, baby, read me my rights. I'm just a prisoner, caught up in a world I can't control. Hey, what am I doing here? Just drowning in these tears. How can you walk away and watch it all just crumble after all these years? Before you do me wrong tonight, baby, baby, read me my rights. wasting my time, just losing my mind before